Imagine a massive U.S. aircraft carrier surrounded by the silent submarines of the Chinese force waiting just under the ocean's surface. What happens next? Will this be the moment to make the U.S. Navy proud, or is it going to be a disaster? The South China Sea is one of the busiest and most strategic waterways in the world, a major shipping route for countries like the U.S. and China, who always compete over this region's influence.
有的大国在不断地加强在这个地区的军事部署，尤其是在强化海上的兵力的存在。关键是
China asserts near total jurisdiction over much of the sea, while the U.S. and many other countries don't recognize these claims. Hence, the U.S. Navy regularly undertakes so-called freedom of navigation operations to assert the principle that all seas belong to everybody and not to China alone. In this case, an American Nimitz-class aircraft carrier sailing through these disputed waters. But the U.S. Navy isn't alone. Accompanying the character is a fleet of destroyers, cruisers, and submarines, all part of a carrier strike group that ensures the carrier's safety. Sounds like a pretty safe place, right? Not quite. Unbeknownst to them, there are Chinese submarines lying in wait under the ocean. Chinese Type 93 and Type 94 submarines are high-tech, highly sophisticated designations that have stealth capabilities. This means that they can move without being detected easily. The goal of circling the carrier is to spy on the U.S. fleet and to collect intelligence, but more impressively, to showcase China's undersea capabilities. So how exactly does the U.S. Navy even know these submarines are there?
So anti-submarine warfare is our ability to track, classify, and localize submarines. We can, detect them with sonar via active sonar or passive sonar. Active sonar where we're actively putting sound into the water. Passive sonar where we're just listening for different noises.
How on earth can sailors in the U.S. Navy know that these submarines are out there? The answer is highly advanced technology. The U.S. Navy employs sonar to detect submarines. Sonar sends sound waves through the water. When the sound waves meet with an object, such as a submarine, they bounce back. Thus, they serve as an indication of where the submarine is located. Detection's not easy, though. Oceans tend to be noisy, what with the crashing of the waves and calls of the whales. So it can be really hard to spot a silent submarine, especially the Type 95 submarines of China, which are constructed in such a way that they become incredibly quiet and difficult to detect by normal means. So how does USA combat that disadvantage? AI, that's how. AI-driven sonar systems are game changers. Such advanced algorithms can now analyze huge amounts of underwater noise and filter out sounds that can be attributed to submarines. They can detect these noises quicker than any human could. Once the system hears something suspicious, it's backed up by human operators to confirm it. Human talent combined with AI allows the U.S. Navy to react to potential threats incredibly quickly. And in this region, when the sonar detects Chinese submarines, game on, because the response from the U.S. is deadly. Once the submarines have been recognized, the U.S. Navy initiates countermeasures against them. The very first thing that happens is that the Combat Information Center comes into operation. This is the nerve center of the entire operation, where sailors monitor radar, sonar, and tactical data from the carrier and its strike group. The Navy performs its classification when a submarine is identified as a danger. They check if the submarine's nuclear-powered ones, like the Type 95, or a quieter diesel-electric submarine. Once sorted, the Navy monitors the submarines attentively. The second problem? The carrier doesn't have to confront just one submarine, but several. The situation becomes much more complicated when 3 Chinese submarines are around the carrier. Lots of submarines execute a tactic known as a wolf pack attack, where more than one submarine attacks together to swarm the defenses of a ship. It's considered a risky move, but the U.S. Navy's ready for it.
Finding submarines is challenging, and it's not only one platform that can do it, it's numerous platforms working together, and it becomes a critical team sport to find those submarines. They're very hard to find, and they're very lethal. That's why nations purchase submarines.
Now, the U.S. defense game is cracked up a notch by Navy destroyers specifically dedicated to anti-submarine warfare as they position themselves around the carrier. However, the Navy's countermeasures don't stop there. The carrier also relies on the Nixie decoy system for protection. The deception is that it creates sounds that confuse incoming torpedoes, causing them to miss their targets. And in case the situation worsens and the submarines fire their torpedoes, the Navy will have some countermeasures and evasive maneuvers ready to deflect them. The U.S. Navy holds a zigzagging tactic too. The carrier changes course rapidly and erratically. This makes it much more difficult for enemy submarines to track the carrier and fire accurately. The final question is, how does this whole thing play out? Will diplomacy save the day, or could this escalate into something much more serious?
Team on the San Jacinto saw a periscope rise 100 to 200 yards in front of the cruiser. The cruiser ordered all back, but it was too late. The Montpelier's vertical control fin was either severely damaged or sheared off.
So what happens next? There's multiple potential outcomes here, and it could all escalate very quickly. Let's consider the worst case scenario. If the Chinese submarines were to launch a torpedo, then all hell would break loose. The US Navy has protocols in place for this kind of situation. The ship's defenses, the Nixie decoys, and the carrier's anti-torpedo systems would activate, and the Navy would commence counterattacking operations. The goal would be to neutralize the threat before the carriers hit. But even without the torpedo firing, the situation is still dangerous. The superiority of the US Navy's tracking systems and decoys might force the Chinese subs to withdraw. The carrier would continue its mission, and the US would then assert its right of navigation in international waters. There's a huge diplomatic angle as well. This is when the US Navy communicates with allied countries such as Japan, Australia, and the Philippines to ensure the possible situation doesn't escalate to an even greater conflict.
We also discussed joint efforts to ensure peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, and freedom of navigation and overflight in the South China Sea. For both of us, maintaining peace and stability, preserving the status quo, is essential, and it's essential not just to us, it's again essential to countries.
This scenario is a typical example of how quickly things can escalate at sea. Be it through advanced tracking systems or tactical maneuverings, the US Navy prepares for such challenges at all times. So what do you think about all this? Would the US Navy come out on top, or is war just a misstep away? Let us know what you think in the comments section down below.